Wait. Did you know that the country we call Iran today once ruled the greatest empire the world had ever seen? Yes, an empire that stretched all the way from Greece to India. And then a handful of Arabs conquered it completely. Then the Mongols came and destroyed it to the ground. Then the British stole its oil. And then in 1979, a revolution shook the entire world. So in today's video, we are going to understand 5,000 years of Iranian history in a single video, in plain, simple language, straight to the point. I'm Your Name, and you are watching Channel Name. The Map, your roadmap through history. All right, first things first. Iranian history is so long that if we just dive straight in, your head is going to spin. So let's break it into three big chunks. Phase 1, Ancient Persia, roughly 2000 BC to 600 AD. Phase 2, Islamic Persia, 600 AD to 1800 AD. Phase 3, the Age of Western Influence, 1800 AD to today. That's it. Remember these three things and everything else will fall into place naturally. Let's get started. Ancient Persia. Elam, the first civilization. The very first urban civilization in Iran was called Elam. This was the region that today makes up Khuzestan province, right on the border with Iraq. And this was no small civilization. It stood shoulder to shoulder with the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and the Assyrians as one of the great civilizations of the ancient Near East. But Elam was just the beginning. The real story is still to come. The Achaemenid Empire, the world's first superpower. Around 550 BC, a man rose to power. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he did something no one had ever done before. He conquered Mesopotamia, he conquered Asia Minor, he conquered Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Turkmenistan. And then when Cyrus died, his son went on to conquer Egypt as well. This empire was so massive that 15 to 20 of today's countries could fit inside it. Then came Darius the Great. Darius organized the empire even further, and he too marched out to conquer Greece. Now, here's something really interesting. We all learned that Persia attacked Greece, but why do we know so much about it? Because Greek historians wrote this history, and they wrote about what mattered to them. In reality, for the massive Persian Empire, a tiny country like Greece was not that big of a deal, but for the Greeks, this was literally a matter of life and death. In 490 BC and again in 480 BC, Persia attacked Greece twice and failed both times. Alexander the Great, the end of the Persian Empire. In 330 BC, a young general came from Macedonia. His name was Alexander the Great, and he steamrolled right through the entire Persian Empire. But then Alexander died, and his generals started fighting each other for control. The result? The empire was split into pieces. The portion of Iran went to Seleucus, and that is how the Seleucid dynasty was born. Here's a fun fact. Hanukkah, the Jewish holiday, actually has its roots in the Seleucid period. A later Seleucid ruler named Antiochus IV persecuted the Jewish people. The Jews rose up in rebellion, drove the Seleucids out, and restored their temple. Hanukkah celebrates that victory. The Arsacid Empire. 400 years of rule. After the Seleucids came the Arsacids, also known as the Parthians. This was the longest ruling dynasty in all of Iranian history, approximately 450 years. But here's the strange part. It's the longest dynasty, and yet we know the least about it. Why? Because almost no written records survived. Most of what we know comes from coins. The Sasanian Empire, the age of Zoroaster. Around 200 AD came the Sasanians. This was the period when the Zoroastrian religion took its complete and final form. It was also in this era that Mani founded a new religion called Manichaeism. It spread across Asia, Europe, and North Africa. It may be the only example in history of a world religion going completely extinct. The Sasanians were constantly at war with the Roman Empire. Sometimes the Sasanians won, sometimes the Romans won. In the final Great War, the Sasanians actually captured Jerusalem and took away the sacred Christian relics stored there. But then the Romans counterattacked, marched all the way to the Sasanian capital Ctesiphon in modern-day Iraq, and burned it to the ground. The war essentially ended as a draw, but this enormous war between Persia and Rome happened right on the eve of something that would change everything. Islamic Persia. The Arab conquest, the world changed forever. 630 to 640 BC, the Arab Muslims launched attacks on two empires at the same time, the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire. The Roman Empire survived partially, but the entire Sasanian Empire was wiped off the map. Now, let's clear up a major misconception here. Many people believe that Arabs forced people to convert to Islam at sword point. That is simply not true. The people of Persia did not become Muslim overnight. It was a very slow and gradual process. The conquest happened in the 600s. By the 900s, the majority of Iranians had converted to Islam. That's a 300-year process. The Umayyads and the Abbasids. First came the Umayyads, 661 to 750 AD. This was an Arab dynasty that ruled over the Persians as a subjected people. Then, in 750, the Abbasids overthrew them. During the Abbasid period, something very significant happened. Persian civilization began to deeply influence the entire Islamic world. You know those numerals we all use in math? 0, 1, 2, 3. We call them Arabic numerals, but in reality, they traveled from India to Persia, from Persia to the Arab world, and from the Arab world to Europe. The Abbasids built their new capital city in Baghdad, and they designed it along Persian lines, a circular city. The famous Persian epic poem Shahnameh by Ferdowsi was also written around this era. The Seljuks, the Sunni revival. In the thousands came the Seljuks. These were Turks that migrated in from Central Asia. They carried out what historians call the Sunni revival. Before the Seljuks, several Shiite dynasties had come to power across the Middle East. The Seljuks overthrew them and restored Sunni rule. They built mosques and madrasas across the region. A madrasa is a school where men could study Islamic law and scholarship. This institution spread throughout the Islamic world. The Mongol storm, the greatest catastrophe in Iranian history. The 1200s, a storm rose from Mongolia. His name was Chinggis Khan, sometimes spelled Genghis Khan, and what happened next is almost impossible to put into words. Cities were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people were killed, centuries of civilization turned to dust. By the 1250s, the Mongols had completely taken over Iran. And then, something strange and remarkable happened. The very same Mongols who had slaughtered Muslims converted to Islam themselves. The Mongol dynasty that ruled Iran is called the Ilkhanate, and these Ilkhanate rulers gradually absorbed into Persian culture and became part of the Persian world. The Mongol period also left another lasting mark. Chinese artistic styles filtered into Persian art. If you look at Persian paintings from the 1300s onwards, you can clearly see Chinese influence. That came directly from the Mongol period. Timur, the king of destruction. Then came Timur, also known as Tamerlane. People sometimes call him the Napoleon of Persia, but that's honestly a bad comparison. At least Napoleon tried to build and govern an empire. Timur only looted, burned, and moved on. He pillaged cities, slaughtered populations, and dragged craftsmen back to his capital Samarkand in Central Asia to build it up for him. He caused absolutely devastating destruction across Iran, and when he died, his sons and grandsons carved up whatever was left. The Safavid Empire, Iran becomes Shiite. In the 1500s, a powerful new dynasty arrived, the Safavids, and they did something that permanently changed Iran's identity and that still defines Iran to this very day. They made Iran Shiite. Before the Safavids, Iran was predominantly Sunni. Shiites were a minority. But when the Safavid dynasty took power, they made Twelver Shi'ism the official state religion, and gradually the entire population converted to Shi'ism. Here's a special highlight. The most celebrated ruler of the Safavid era was Shah Abbas the Great. He built a new planned city in Isfahan that left the world speechless. Wide, grand boulevards, an enormous rectangular plaza called the Maidan, magnificent mosques and palaces. And this was also the period when European travelers began visiting Iran in significant numbers for the first time. Those European visitors left behind detailed written accounts of life in Safavid Persia, what people wore, what they ate, how they lived their daily lives. So the Safavid period marks the beginning of Iran's regular contact with the Western world, a trend that would grow enormously in the centuries to come. The Age of Western Influence. Nadir Shah, Iran's Napoleon. In the 1700s, the Safavid dynasty collapsed, and onto the scene stepped Nadir Shah. Now, this man can actually be called the Napoleon of Persia with some justification. Like Napoleon, he launched spectacular